your own paper. Let's look at this guy. So 1, 1, negative 3, negative 1, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, negative 1, 2, 0, 1. Row 1, what do we have to do? We're good, nothing. Row 2. Should have given you a much harder one. Nothing. All right, row 3, who do we need to eliminate? Who do we need to eliminate first? The negative 1. So what can we do to eliminate a negative 1? Row 1 plus row 3 to replace row 3. There's row 1. Here's row 2. When I add these two up, I'm replacing row 3. Add them up and replace row 3. So we're getting close. I've got a 0 in the X spot on the last row. What do I do with the 3 here, though? What's my goal? I need him to go away. Totally away. So I could say negative 3 row 2 plus row 3. Is that what I heard? So row 1, row 2. So negative 3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times negative 1, positive 3 minus 3. Negative 3 times 0.
Students, we are aware of the traffic on 46. No longer will traffic delays or traffic accidents be an excuse tardy. If you were late due to traffic or any reason, you were expected to serve lunch attention. Again, traffic is no longer an excuse for being tardy to the school. Thank you.
So if I were to rewrite this, I end up with x plus y minus 3z is negative 1. Y minus z is 0. And nothing is equal to nothing. So what does this tell me? Okay, so if all of my variables are eliminated in an equation, but I get a true statement, it means there are infinite solutions. Now, here is the difference between what you got to do and extra credit. You got to be able to solve it and tell me there are infinite solutions. If you would like extra credit, you can tell me how those solutions are related to each other. So you're going to show me the relationship between x and y and z. When I multiplied this, row 2 by negative 3, I got 0, negative 3, 3, 0. And when I added that to the last row, everybody canceled. All right, so now you've got to tell me how everybody is related. So we're going to do that by looking at my system of equations right here. What do I know? If I take this equation right here, if y minus z is 0, what do I know about y and z? If y minus z is 0, no, y minus z is equal to 0. So y is equal to z, right? Y subtract z is 0, so if I solve this to get y alone, I get y is equal to z. So in order to tell how they're related, I'm going to write all of my points in terms of one variable. So I'm going to write my x, y, z triple, all in terms of z or all in terms of y, it doesn't matter, but I'm all going to write them in terms of one variable. So if I know y is z, and obviously z is z, I could rewrite this as something, comma, z, comma, z. because y and z are equal. Well, but I need to know how x is related to them. So I take the first equation, and if y and z are equal, if they're both z, I have x plus z minus 3z equals negative 1. And now I've got to solve for x in terms of z as well. Everywhere I saw a y, I replaced it with z. I'm trying to get one equation. So if you had like x plus y equals 1, you could write x in terms of y, couldn't you? You could also write y in terms of x. So this is y in terms of x. This is x in terms of y. All I'm doing is writing all of my answers in terms of one variable. I just happen to have chosen z. You could have chosen y. Okay, so what is z minus 3z? So x minus 2z is negative 1, but I want to solve for x. So what do? What I do to one side, I do to the other. 2z minus 1. So that means all of my answers will be in the form 2z minus 1, z, z. So any triple that works will be in that form. So if I wanted to see what happens, for example, remember there are an infinite number of solutions, but here are some examples of solutions that work. If z is 1, y is 1, if I plug in a 1 for z here, what is x? 1. Well, if z is 0 and y is 0, if I plug in a 0 for z, what would 1 be? If z was 3, that means y is 3. If I plug in a 3 here for z, 5. Yes, because it's the only one that there's more than one solution. But if I know how they're related to each other, I can come up with a bunch of examples that all work. All of these are solutions that solve all three of my equations. So I could plug this in, or this in to all three equations, and I should get them all to work. So whenever my planes intersect, they intersect all along this line. And you're just finding the relationship between the points on that line. So what you've really done is figured out how, oops, wrong one, how they're all related to each other. Now, all you have to be able to do is tell me infinite solutions. If you want bonus points, you can tell me how they're related to each other. That will separate the men from the boys. So on your paper, you're going to jot some of this down. You don't have to write it all, right? Shorthand is a good trick for college. So borrowed, $225,000, 3 different lenders, 5%, 6%, 7%. How much each rate? Total interest was $13,000. Twice as much was borrowed at the 5% rate than the 7% rate. So take a minute to jot. The question that I'm asking is how much was borrowed at 5%, how much at 6%, and how much at 7%. So I have 3 things I don't know. So I have 3 variables I need to solve, an x, a y, and a z. So we'll define our variables. X will be the amount borrowed at 5%. Y will be the amount borrowed at 6%. And z will be the amount borrowed at 7%. Now, remember, if I'm trying to find interest, interest is my PERT, my principal times rate times time. Interest is principal times rate times time. But if I want to know annual interest, time then is just 1 year. So if time is 1, then I just have P times R, right? Time is 1 year. P is my principal. It's how much I borrowed or how much I invested. Either way, it's the amount of money. And R is the interest rate. And so I have to multiply those. But in order to multiply them, I have to make the interest rate a decimal first. So my first equation is how much did I borrow? So the amount I borrowed at 5% plus the amount borrowed at 6% plus the amount borrowed at 7% will be the total amount borrowed. There's my first equation. If I have three variables, how many equations will I have? Three. Now I'm going to have an interest equation because I know my total interest for the year, my annual interest was $13,000. So the amount I borrowed at 5%, I paid 5% interest on. So 0.05 times the amount of money I borrowed at that interest rate is 5% of that, or times that, that's how much I pay in interest. I pay 6% of my Y investment, and I pay 7% of my Z investment for a total interest payment for the year of $13,000. Interest at 5%, interest at 6%, interest at 7%, total interest. Now the last equation says twice as much was borrowed at 5% than 7%. So where do I have more money? 5%. So X is the amount borrowed at 5% is twice the amount borrowed at 7%. So there's my system of equations. Now we could go and do a traditional substitution or elimination problem here because we could put this in two variables pretty easily, couldn't we? What could I do to put it in two variables pretty easy? So everywhere I see an X here and here, I could replace it with 2Z. But we're just going to do this to get a little more practice with our elimination method. So our very first equation, 1, 1, 1, $225,000. 0.05, 0.07, 13,000. Now, I've got to get X and Y all on the same side and Z. So this equation could be rewritten as X minus 2Z is 0. So 1, 0, negative 2, 0. Because I have to rewrite them, right? I need all the X's, all the Y's, all the Z's lined up. So they have to be on the same side. So if I have X equals 2Z, I need to solve it by getting all the Z's on the same side. So X minus 2Z is 0. Now, I'd like to get this in row echelon form, which means the very first equation needs to have a leading coefficient of 1, and we're good. So row 1 is done. Now, before I do anything else, I don't really want to deal with decimals. So what could I do to row 2? Multiply it by 100. If I multiply it by 100, my decimals will go away. So this would be 5, 6, 7, 13,000, but if I multiply it by 100, I add 2 zeros, so 1,300,000. So there's my new matrix. Now, row 1 we said was good. Row 2, we'd like to get rid of the who. 5, how could we do that? Negative 5, row 1, plus row 2. And we're going to replace row 2 with the answer. So negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Negative 5 plus 5 is 0. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Negative 5 plus 6 is 1. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Negative 5 plus 7, 2. Now, negative 5 times 225,000. So we know some shortcuts, right? So that's 5, 2, that's 10, 12, that's 10, 11. And there's my 3 zeros. So that's negative 1,125,000 plus 1,300,000. So if I add two numbers with different signs, what am I really doing? Subtracting. So really what I want to know is 0 minus 0, 0, 0. I'm subtracting 1,125,000 from 1,300,000. So it's what? 175,000? Right? This right here would be 0, carry the 1, that's 789, 0, carry the 1, 1, 2, 3, yep. So 175,000. Just a little subtraction. All right, so row 2, we're good. Who do we have to get rid of on row 3? So what are we going to do? There we go. So negative row 1 plus row 3. So negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 plus 0, negative 1. Negative 1 minus 2, negative 3. Negative 225,000 plus 0. Now who do I need to get rid of? How can I do that? Add who? I don't want to add row 1 because he's going to bring back a 1 in the x place. Row 2 and row 3 to replace row 3. Row 2 plus row 3. 0, 0, negative 1, negative 50,000. I'm almost done. What do I need to do? So I need to multiply row 3 by a negative. And when I do that, what's going to happen? So I don't have to rewrite the whole matrix. Not to be in row echelon form. I mean, I can still solve it. I'm just not in row echelon form, which is my goal. So I have x plus y plus z is 225,000. I have y plus 2z is 175,000. And I have z is 50,000. So I've already got one answer. So I know that I have $50,000 invested at 7%. If I go back and plug that into the previous equation, what's 2 times 50,000? So y plus 100,000 is 175,000, so what's y? So I have 75,000 invested at 6%. Well, this is already 125,000. How much total did I have? So what do I have left over? 100,000 invested at 5%. So your homework tonight is 8 of these and one word problem. So 9 questions. So we're going to grade your homework, and then you get the last 20-something minutes of class work. Yes.